So let's get started. Hey, everyone. Awesome to have you back here. Excited. We have an awesome agenda and a quick announcement before we get started. So all of you that are looking for a event that's during the daytime, during business hours, so this might be for more of the podcast listeners, specifically EU and Europe, but also everyone across the US and Canada. We have a live event happening next Thursday, August 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern, featuring Dave Gerhardt. That'll be our Demand Gen Expert Series. We do it, I think, on the first Thursday of every month. So topics, TBD, but that is typically a really awesome event. And so if you are interested, we'd love to see you there. We'll drop a registration link in the show notes, and we'll drop it as well in this chat for the people that are live. Cool. Now moving into the agenda. Before we get into the agenda, there's just something that I was working on that I just want to talk about briefly so people have some anticipation for what's coming. And so I, at the moment, am running a deep analysis on the performance of LinkedIn lead gen. We have quite a few companies participating in this, not just analyzing what everyone looks at and what the LinkedIn ad reps tell you to look at, which is how much the leads cost in LinkedIn and then how many that you got, but also with the data from the lead forms into marketing automation, into the CRM, tracking against opportunities for a 2-year period of time, all of 2019 and all of 2020. The data set includes $7 million in spend and more than 100,000 leads. And I think people are going to be pretty fascinated with the results. That will not be published anytime soon, but I'm hoping to get it done before the end of the year. And in the meantime, if you are doing stuff like this, if you're running LinkedIn lead gen to content downloads or using lead forms another way and trying to push them into sales conversations, I would, just based on my anecdotal look at the data in the spreadsheet, I would highly recommend that you do this analysis for yourself because it doesn't look good. All right, now that we got that out of the way, moving on to the agenda, we'll start with the 5 reasons why B2B advertising fails. I've been thinking about this a lot. I interact with a lot of companies that either try and do it themselves or work with a different agency and don't see results, and I've kind of distilled this down to 5 core reasons, and it all revolves around, like, some people are like, yeah, like, we're running LinkedIn ads, Chris, what can we do next? And it's more about how you do them. A lot of people hear me say this, like, a lot of people execute LinkedIn organic. Very few of them have figured out how to make it work, like myself and my company. Very few, a lot of people do a podcast, a lot of people do events, but there are only a subset of those people that are able to get people that love their events, that keep coming back, that have a podcast that people love, that they publish consistently. And so when we think about B2B advertising, it's not what channel, it's about how you use the channel. So starting off the 5 reasons. Number 1 is targeting. I see a ton of companies miss on this. I go in and run analysis on companies that we're either about to work with or just working, doing some consulting on their side and looking at what either their current agency is doing or a lot more often what their existing team is doing. And all it takes is going into LinkedIn and looking at how the targeting is set up, and then that'll tell you a very clear story. So in step 1 in targeting, the mistakes that people make, like, I've seen industry targeting on LinkedIn with no job titles, no account firmographics, just blasting the whole financial services industry with your message when you're only going after a very specific persona inside of a set of companies inside of that industry. So just too wide in the criteria. A lot of companies will either use industry or they'll use function to make big audiences that are just really inefficient in getting to who you want to. Other things where companies miss, I see this all the time, is running Facebook native targeting in B2B. So there are small instances, unique instances where this can work, but most often with B2B, especially if you have company size requirements, if you only can sell to companies that are more than 500 employees or only more than 200 employees or whatever you're going after, Facebook becomes a very difficult channel to use native targeting. And then even worse, what companies do is then they'll build lookalike audiences off of the native targeting or some list that they have. And the lookalike audience will get built with 2.3, 2.6 million people if you're doing it in the US. I'm not exactly sure, but some more than 2 million people will be in the audience. And then I go in and look at these companies and they have several lookalikes running at 1%. And they can only sell to C-suite in the Fortune 500 or only companies that have 10,000 employees. And I'm like, what are you doing? None of these ads are touching anyone that you want to reach. And so there are just a ton of different challenges that companies face in targeting. If you're using LinkedIn from a targeting perspective, I highly recommend using job title targeting along with company firmographics. That could be named accounts, that can be company size, that could be company industry, whatever combination of those three that you want to use. That is the preferred targeting method in LinkedIn. And then in Facebook, if you are planning to spend some money on Facebook and invest in it and actually take it seriously, not run a $1,000 test and collect 6 leads and give up, if you're actually going to take it seriously because it drives a big impact, then you're going to need to think about getting a tool to target. If you meet some of the criteria that I talked about, you have company size requirements, you have a smaller TAM, it's a well-defined audience, you can't get to them natively. Those are the times where you're going to want to get a tool to target. So targeting is number one. That one is so easily solvable. It's like, define well who you're going after and then figure out what channels you're going to be able to get to those people in the right way. And if you need to add tech to do it, then consider adding tech. Number 2 is placement. I see this a lot. So a really easy example of this is like the placement in general for people is where the ads are showing up. And so a lot of companies miss in display ads, like their main mechanism is display ads. And I'll just pause here. Like, I think the last time I actually saw a display ad was years ago. Like I almost feel like I'm numb to them. I don't see them. I think, I would encourage a lot of people on this Zoom and people listening afterwards to think about the last time that you saw a banner ad on some website and then you considered like buying something. Nobody clicks on them, so you're just going after the impression. Did that impression make a difference to you? Do you think it made a difference to your buyer? That's something to consider. People use display because the ABM platforms only offer right now display and LinkedIn. And some companies, even though they're selling 100K, ARR deals, they're like, well, LinkedIn's too expensive. The CPMs are too high. The CPCs are too high. So we're going to use display. And I'm like, what's expensive is that you just spent $100,000 on display ads and you have nothing to show for it. There's nothing wrong with the price of LinkedIn ads at the moment. And so generally on the placement, some of the places where people miss, one, overinvested in display ads. So that's one thing to consider. If you're running them out of Google Display Network, even worse. If you're running them out of an ABM tool, better. Using audience network inside of LinkedIn. LinkedIn turns it on by default because it helps you waste money. It allows their algorithm to add more people into the audience. And also, so there's audience network and then there's audience expansion. So audience expansion is when they add more people to the audience and then they help you waste money and people that you don't really want to target. The reason that you pay $40 to $80 CPM on LinkedIn is so you can get to exactly who you want. If you want to use algorithmic expansion, I highly recommend using a different platform like Facebook and Instagram, where I just believe that their data is better. The other one is on audience network, which would be either on Facebook or Instagram, allowing your ad that you designed for the Facebook feed or the LinkedIn feed, and then allowing Facebook to go out and put that on random mobile apps, a ton of different display network channels. And the reason that the ad platforms tell you to do it and the reason that companies do want to do it is because it siphons off a portion of your ads at a way lower CPM with garbage inventory. So it lowers your overall CPM and it makes you feel good because you're paying $10 CPM on LinkedIn instead of 55, but most of the impressions are never getting seen and in garbage placements. So highly encourage people to not use that feature, or if you'd like, test it for yourself, but set up a well-organized test so you can actually get the data. Number 3 is objective. This isn't the technical side of like the campaign objective of traffic or conversion or whatever. It's not the technical campaign objective. It is the mindset that people use to define what their objective is, which on paid social is 99% of the time lead gen. And so when you're in a paid social awareness channel and your mindset is on lead gen, what you're going to end up doing is collecting a ton of email addresses for people that don't want to buy. And LinkedIn is very good at optimizing so that people will fill out the form so that you get a $50 lead and you have an email address from some company that fits your ICP. So you're like, yeah, we're crushing it. But never seen LinkedIn talk about the conversion from when they fill out that LinkedIn lead gen form to when they become a customer. We're building the data on it because I just watch how many companies waste money doing this, both on the advertising side and the sales resources and the marketing time. Just so much waste and inefficiency in doing it this way. And so generally the objective and the mindset is I need to convert someone right now. I want this lead right now. And when you do that, it inherently changes your behavior of what you do. It becomes very selfish. Even if you're subconscious to it, even if it's happening subconsciously, it is selfish behavior. You don't try and help people. You don't consider the messaging. You only consider whether or not someone converted on your form and how cheap the lead was. And so objective is one of the major ones that are big challenges inside of companies, especially on paid social. If you are in Google ads, because I know this was why B2B advertising fails, and so I've been mainly talking about paid social up to this point. If you're in Google ads and you're going high intent keywords, you should be running lead gen. You should be trying to convert people. So do that. The original statement on the objective was mainly for awareness channels like paid social. The next one is becoming the most obvious to me, and I think the least obvious to most people that execute B2B advertising, which is the creative. It blows me away how little respect or thought goes into creative at the executive level or on the marketing team level at very large organizations. They spend no time on it. They don't think about the variations. They don't think about how much they're going to need to support the frequency and the audience size. They don't do any of it. They don't put it out consistently. And so all they're doing is they have taken a Google mindset where you just push a button and spend a bunch of money and hope you get results, and then put that into paid social. And what you get when you do that is the same ad 100 times in LinkedIn. I'm sure people, when I say that, people know, like there are some companies that don't monitor frequency on their ads, or they don't have enough backup creative. So they have to push this ad with so much budget that you see the same fucking ad 100 times. And it's annoying. Outreach has done it before to me. And so like the creative is a massive, massive factor into whether or not you're successful here. And I just don't see companies considering it enough. And then when you get to a place where if the stuff is actually working, let's say you're spending $50K a month and you got LinkedIn dialed in and you're getting whatever your high intent demos at $750, which will give you an SQO at, I don't know, $2,200. And so your LinkedIn's rolling at 50K. And then you're like, okay, well, let's push it. We want to go to 150K. What we're going to do is we're going to add $100,000 in media and $0 in additional creative. And you're going to scale that up. It's going to hit way diminishing returns. You're going to flood your audience and it's not going to work. When you're scaling paid social creative, you need to scale the content and the media linearly. It's the only way this works. And even still, you're going to hit a point where you can't spend anymore without saturating your audience. So you're going to hit a ceiling. But I interact with a ton of companies, and I have found very few that have this mindset on creative. And a lot of the companies that I interact with are ones that are spending $100,000 in LinkedIn. So just pushing people very hard to consider it. When you have more variations of creative, you have more runway. It goes further. You can spend more while maintaining cost efficiency baselines and overall results while you scale. So creative is a huge one and probably the missing piece for a lot of different companies. And so the last thing I'll say on creative is that if you feel like you have the other things on this sheet mapped out, if you feel like you're targeting well, if you feel like you got the right placements, if you feel like you got the right mindset and the right objectives, if you feel like you got number 5, which I'm going to talk about soon, if you feel like you have all of those things, then it's most likely the messaging and the creative. And so if you're working through this, try and eliminate the variables of the places where it goes wrong so you can center in on, okay, this is the thing. I know I'm targeting the right people. I know I'm in the right places, blah, 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 blah. Most likely it's creative. And the last one is budget, more specifically low budget and unrealistic expectations, which can drive the wrong objectives, the wrong mindset, the wrong behaviors when you're in that situation. And so when I do this with companies, because a lot of companies, are especially ones that aren't accustomed to spending money on advertising, I challenge them to quantify how much it's costing them to get a qualified meeting or a sales qualified opportunity via their outbound channel, purely based on SDR headcount expenses. And then they'll go and run that analysis, and they'll tell me, somewhere between probably $5,000 and $8,000 in SQO outbound. And then once we have that data, I'm going to go back to them and say, okay, so you're suggesting that we spend $10,000 a month on ads, but it's costing your outbound team $8,000 to get one SQO. So what are you expecting this advertising to do? This isn't magic. It's just a completely different way to do business development, completely different, more efficient way to do prospecting. And so if we go with your math and we even do twice as good as your outbound channel, we're going to get 2 SQOs this month. And that's probably way lower than what your plan is for your expectations. And so I highly encourage companies to go through that motion to level set on what they think they should be getting out of advertising, because for whatever reason, people think that because it's ad dollars instead of outbound, it's going to do something, out of control better than what's happening. It definitely should be better. That's the key I want to take here. Like, advertising in this method to drive SQOs, when compared against cold calling random people in your CRM or ebook downloads in your CRM, this should do a lot better. And so those are the 5: targeting, placement, objective, creative, budget. Would love to take some questions now, right now.
And I had a question clarifying, I think, your point on creative. What do you mean by scaling the content and ads linearly?
So let's pretend that you're spending $50,000, and we'll cover some of this later in the episode where I go into the content mix. But let's say that you're spending $50,000 a month, and at the moment your mix is like 5 product marketing ads and 1 blog. So that's what you got. Your mix is working. It's effective. When you're measuring it against cost per SQO, you feel like you're in a really good place. And then when you try and move from 50 to 100, considering that you're going to probably need more volume of content and creative to fill the channel to avoid frequency without saturating the audience. So if you just ramped up the budget, what would happen is all the people in the audience would see all of the same ads at least 2x more on average. And so in order to avoid that type of fatigue, it's having enough creative to slot that in so that when the initial creative, because you're spending twice as much every day, when the initial creative hits frequency, which would be twice as fast, that you would have something to swap to that ideally had already gone through like the learning phase and was validated that it was going to work. And then you can just turn one ad off and you can let the one that you already know is going to work because you validated it and run that to keep the train moving. And so there's a volume play here that's unlike Google, which I think is why people don't understand it, is that you're trying to communicate a bunch of different messages. And when you're paying money to distribute that message. And if you only put one message in the channel and then you distribute it over and over, you're dramatically limiting your upside, because at some point people are going to tune it out because they've seen it a bunch of times. And I believe that number is somewhere between 2.5 and 4. Other people have opinions closer to 6, but my belief is that 2.5 to 4 frequency at the ad level is the right cutoff point.
Nice. Another question you were kind of talking through as you're going through the list on the trade-offs between outbounding for sales versus investing in inbound. At what point would you consider building out and investing in a marketing function from an ARR perspective?
Like at
Like
at
at
zero
what,
ARR, that's what I would do. Like when you decide to incorporate your business, that would be a good time to start figuring out how to do marketing. I don't there. It's 2021, right? I believe, and I think this is becoming clear to a lot of people, that the way to win right now is a combination of marketing and customer success. That's the win. Do great marketing so you attract a lot of people, you create demand for your category, which makes sales super easy so you don't need to scale your sales team like every SaaS company does. And then deliver an incredible experience to your customers with experts that can really help them, which then feeds word of mouth, which feeds reviews, which feeds social proof, which drives all of the people back through. But at the moment, what companies do is that they don't build marketing, they scale a huge sales team without product market fit, they underinvest in customer success and product, and that's where they end up. So if I, like when we started the company, it was marketing. I feel like any company today would be should really consider doing that immediately.
All right. We've got our very own MJ with a question. The stage is yours.
All right. The last question Megan asked was from me, and it's partly informed by like people I talk to on a weekly basis. And I find that a lot of people outbound their way to 10 million ARR. And I think part of the reason that they outbound their way to 10 million ARR is because you can add one sales headcount, and I think the logic would go that that person is immediately productive because they create their own content in terms of writing their own sequences, and they are the distribution because they go out and track the person down and send them the message, and then they qualify them as well. Whereas building a marketing team, you have to invest in 3 units of overhead, right? You've got to invest in somebody to make the content, a content specialist, somebody who does the paid media and provides that content reach into the marketplace. And so it's more fragmented into different specialties. And so I think the counter argument to what you're saying around building the marketing team is you have to invest in like 3 different people to get an effective marketing team, whereas each salesperson gets you like an incremental increase in your ability to generate pipeline. So what would you say to somebody with that kind of objection?
You mentioned that a lot of companies get to 10 million ARR by brute force outbound. I think probably about the exact same amount of companies get to 10 million ARR pure inbound. So like there's a lot of companies that get to 10 million ARR, have not spent on ads, are in some type of free trial motion, have been maybe like in SEO, and they get there and then they realize, well, what are we going to now? Now we need to move up market. Now we need to figure out how to build marketing, and they're in a tough spot too. And so it can be in either place. I think that the right answer is to do both. And I would also push back on you that you need 3 heads. Like there's probably plenty of people that are on this Zoom right now that could do that whole job. I know that I could. I don't need 3 people to do that. I don't think that you do either, MJ. So I think that there are people out there that could do that job, but they don't want to do that job because they're in a small company that doesn't believe in marketing, that doesn't have product market fit, that has a large sales team and has the wrong marketing goals. And so that's why great marketers don't want to move into that environment. And the argument about like that the salesperson makes an impact more quickly, sure, but get up to 12 sales reps with no marketing and then see what happens. Every rep is moving at 25 to 50% productivity because you have no brand and demand, and you just have a super inefficient channel. And so a lot of companies do it that way because the revenue targets are small and they can pay, 4-year customer acquisition costs based on the money raised to get through the first 5 million. And a lot of companies do that. But I would highly recommend what I think smart companies are doing right now, which is build a customer acquisition engine that's efficient from the beginning. It's not that difficult. It's not hard to do. It takes customer focus, it takes effort, it takes some knowledge that we distribute here all the time. So I see a lot of venture funded companies that quote unquote brute force their way to 10 million ARR, and then they get to 10 million and they have to go and raise money to try and get to 30, and they're not gonna be able to get there because their customer acquisition cost payback period is so high that they need to like do bad things like stop going after SMB and go all the way to enterprise because the deal sizes are bigger. And then they move into a market that they have no product market fit, have no idea how to sell to them, not sure whether or not they have the right sales motion, and they lose. And so that'd be it wouldn't be my ideal scenario to be at 10 million ARR and not have a marketing engine going. But everyone can do what they want.
Great question, MJ. Look at the rant you inspired. The chat is going wild about a question that Anna asked.
Okay.
I must ask on her behalf. Chat gone wild, exciting. Can you go through an example or exercise for creating an actual great LinkedIn ad? What is the headline, copy, creative? We're all on the edge of our seats.
Ooh. So I'll do two different looks at this because there's a lot of ways to make this work. And so one thing that I would do, and I've been talking about this for a while, we should just test it so that when let's just make a note of that, Angelica or MJ, like so that every time I say this, we actually have the data to prove that it works, because I think that it would. Taking videos that are about your category or your strategic narrative or whatever, anything like that, and then posting it organically where people already like it, and then using it to deploy ads against people that are in your target accounts or your list. I think that would be a huge one. So easy example, we create the keynote about the dark funnel. I have this 8-minute video about the dark funnel that explains why attribution is completely ruining marketing at the moment. And then I take that after 800 people that are in my audience already liked it and engaged with it. And then I pull that video and I run it to CMOs of companies with 200 employees and above inside of SaaS, like computer software industry. And I run that ad. That's an example. Another one that a lot of people I think overlook in this model is just good product marketing. Like we'll talk about the mix later, but probably 50% or more of the mix is going to product marketing in the accounts that I'm working on right now, because it's fascinating how few people in the market actually know the details about a product. Because companies, instead of communicating broadly to the entire market about their product, they try and shove people into a meeting so that their sales rep can tell them the same information. So inefficient. And so instead of doing that, you could actually just observe 3 or 4 demos that are happening, or listen to gong calls, or you could do the demos yourself, or you can just go and talk to customers, whatever you want to do to get the information. Figure out the places where it clicks. You're saying things, people are resonating. They're like, oh, that's working. Take those statements, figure out how to explain them in a 15-second video or an image or a 2-minute video. Length doesn't matter. And then run that to who you want to get to, and then take all 5 to 10 things that were important in the call that you want to get covered and build creative specifically for them and deploy those messages into the market. I'll give you an example for the company that I worked at. I knew, because I went out and talked to hundreds of people that were our prospective customers, and I talked to a bunch of people that were our customers. I knew the differences between what our customers believed and what people that didn't use our product believed, and what the gaps were. Identified the gaps. They didn't understand the new clinical trial that came out. They thought that our product was only for specific use cases when it wasn't. They had several other opinions, and my job was to map back content and messages that addressed those objections or educated people in a way that was backed by data, that was objective, so that they could better understand those things. And so I distributed the clinical trial to people. I created a case study with a academic hospital that used our product on a use case that other people believe that you could never use it on. We had a case, and we built several other case studies with hospitals highlighting other components that were good with our product that addressed objections or educated someone on the things that they didn't know that were true. And so there's a huge level of, like I mentioned in either case, observing demos, doing customer research. There's a huge level of understanding what your buyer is in order to craft the right product marketing messages in order to distribute it effectively. And so those are two examples. The medium doesn't matter. Image, carousel, video, audio, whatever you think is the best, or you can try a bunch of different variations of it. So the medium doesn't matter. It's more on the strategy and the thought process, and you can do that. We'll go through the paid social mix later on. I feel like we're getting asked to get into that stuff right now, but yeah, those are two examples.
Nice. Let me squeeze in a question for Bob, and then let's get back to that agenda topic right after. So I answered this in the chat. I'll say how I answered it, but I want to know how you're going to answer this question. How do you decide if you have product market fit? Are there any certain metrics for sales cycle velocity or CAC, ability to go outbound or inbound? My take is, when you have it. And if you aren't sure, you don't. But what do you say, Chris?
It's a good take. I'll defer to Mark Robert's definition on this. I think that's by far the smartest one that I've heard before, which is that once you have customers, you set back a leading metric to retention that you can measure in the first 30 to 60 days of them being a customer. So for HubSpot back in the day when Mark worked there, it was that they had to use 5 parts of the tool. And if they used 5 parts of the tool within the first 30 days, they were likely to renew the next year. And so that became the leading metric of retention. That's what CSMs were focused on. That's what they did. So, and they had enough data of historicals that companies had been there for multiple years to look back and be like, yeah, like we have a high degree of confidence that if this happens, this customer will renew. And if this doesn't happen, the likelihood of the customer renewing goes way down. And so whatever that leading metric to retention is, to be able to hit it, and then you have to decide what percentage of our customers need to hit it, and then what is it, and what's the time window that it needs to get hit in. And that can help you define product market fit. If you aren't looking at this objectively, you can basically game the system to pretend, like to lie to yourself that you are doing product market fit. And so it needs to be careful. It needs to be objective. It's something that you need to consider here. But I also agree that like
when you know.
Yeah. We're over here at Refine Labs. We know, like, the exact company that we're going after, that we provide dramatic value to and help. I know exactly what they look like and who they are. And so I'm not sure if you have a follow-up, Bob, but that's the couple of different thoughts. You got 3 angles. You got, leading metric of retention, and then again.
All right, let's get into building your paid social content mix. I think this is going to be a really good topic, and I bet we're going to drum up a lot more questions.
Cool. Yeah, we've been alluding to it like 3 or 4 times already so far. So, without further ado, building your paid social.
Drum roll. All right, go.
Building your paid social content mix. And so where do I start on this one?
From the beginning.
Yes. When you're thinking about the content mix that you would use on paid social, like I alluded to before, it requires a deep level of customer understanding, especially when you're looking to create demand, to understand when you write a blog, what do you need to communicate in that blog? What is the key takeaway? How are you going to get people to consume the message? Why is it important? How does it align to business objectives? How does it align to moving someone forward in their buying journey or buying process with you? Those are some things that you need to think about. But I recommend just calling it a full funnel content mix. So you're working all the way across. And my belief is that it's very difficult to predict where one individual person is in their buying cycle. And so I typically take an audience and I run the whole thing, and I create content that is strong and would be effective and people would engage with, whether they were unaware of the brand, or they were a customer, or they were in pipeline, or they were in market based on some intent data. No matter what place they're in, how is this piece of content providing value and doing something? And the best way that I found to think about it from a content standpoint is thinking about it like I'm a news reporter is one way to look at it. And another way to look at it is to think about it like you're the keynote speaker. And it doesn't mean that you need to be in video in order to do that, but there's two different vantage points. One, you're reporting on things that are objective that can help people understand things as if they're news because you're in a news feed. And so providing things that feel like news with packaged up messages that you want to communicate to people can be a very good way to get that done. Keynote speaker can also be a very good one, especially for companies that have a strong narrative or have worked on designing their category. Those two elements can work very well. And then the last piece that I don't know why people skip by this one is a huge focus on product marketing. There is so much that you would be able to communicate to your market about your product, especially for SaaS companies that have tons of integrations. We have technographic data, tons of different use cases, social proof, key features, value props, all those different things. And being able to package those up and communicate them in a way, because none of your competitors are doing it. It's crazy, like almost zero MarTech vendors do this. They sell marketing software, but they don't actually do this in marketing, which is interesting to me. So like, I use this example a lot because I'm just trying to push this company to actually do something here. Like, why doesn't the entire market, every marketer in the US and every marketer in EMEA, because they're global, why doesn't every marketer know what the dark funnel is? Know exactly how 6 Sense is used, know exactly how it's different from Terminus or Demandbase or otherwise. Unless you use one of those products, almost zero marketers know those things. Why? And that's how you build an advantage using product marketing and paid social, because zero companies do this. And so when you are in a category and maybe you're competing with a big company, or maybe you're with 3 companies that are all kind of lined up and somebody's going to win the category, and right now you're all about 50 to 100 million ARR, and you're trying to figure out who the one to win is, this is a path to winning. Because you can educate people about the things about your product that move them, so when that they consider buying something in the category, they start to spec in the features that are unique to you because you told them about them. So when they put their requirements together, they start putting those into the requirements, which eventually lock other people out. And so product marketing is a huge one. Let's just call it 50% of the mix. It could be more. There's, for large total addressable markets, for a lot of other scenarios, like it could actually be a lot more than 50% and be highly effective if there's enough volume of creative and messaging to push it through. Product marketing. The next bucket I would throw in is social proof. Social proof could include user-generated content from a customer or an evangelist. It could include a quote that you pull off of G2 and use your customer's words. It could be a more traditional case study that's on your website. You could take the video of the case study that's on your website with the customer in the interview and the high production quality that all those companies do, and take that video and put it in the channel so you tell more of the story in the feed. If you don't have the video because you just have a written case study, you could take the elements of the case study, repackage that into an animation, and tell the story in the feed. So there's a lot of variety in how you could use social proof in terms of mediums of distribution and micro adjustments to the tactics, with the goal of the market understanding what customers are saying about you before they decide they want to buy something and they're looking at G2, trying to get to them before they do that. In all of these different elements that we talk through, instead of waiting till someone's in buy mode and then hoping that they stumble on your G2 profile and hoping that they find you in SEO and are moving to search, you've already told them all these things. So social proof is 2. You can develop the percentage mix. I would say 10 to 15% here. The next one is like I would consider some combination of narrative, brand, category. So like something in line with that, which is communicating you're evangelizing the category. It's a lot of the type of marketing that we do here at Refine Labs, and that could be through videos like mine. It could be animations that tell a story about how, in 2011 there was no contact information, so marketing had to generate a bunch of MQLs. But now, 10 years later, there's a ton of contact information. Marketing doesn't need to generate low intent leads for sales to call. And you could make that into a little story, and you could put that into an animation and put that on LinkedIn, which would be a good use case, and anyone could do that with the product, right? Drift, forms suck, use chatbots. You could do anything like that. So narrative, category, brand, obviously in that case, if you're going to do that, you're going to need to have a strong narrative, or you're going to have a structured category designs in order to do that. So I think a lot of companies might disqualify themselves from that one, but that is a huge one I think could be highly effective. The next one, maybe 10%, I would call it PR and updates. So some examples of this would be a lot of companies will put out a press release when they launch a new product, or they get win this huge health system and they're going to roll out to 50 other accounts and it's a big deal. They'll put together a press release that talks about that thing. And I would suggest rewriting the press release as if you were a peer of your customer rather than if you were writing it for investors, and putting it on your blog and then running ads to those things so that the signals that the customers are getting, one, it's news, positioned as news objective, so it's more likely to get consumed. You're not trying to sell there, you're trying to educate. And so people over time see, wow, that company over there is launching products left and right, new features, new integrations, they're moving forward. That's the type of company that I want to have as a partner as we grow. Product announcements, they're rolling out with all these new big companies like mine. You can think about what other types of news you could do for us in like healthcare, medical. So this could fall into pharma, medical device, other ones, is distributing clinical information. And so what the companies in that space will do is that they'll spend hundreds of thousands, but most likely millions of dollars to fund clinical trials about their product that evaluate their product versus the gold standard or versus a different device or things like that. They'll invest millions of dollars in it. They'll get it published in a journal, like New England Journal of Medicine or something, and then they'll hope that the physician that they need is going to read that journal, is going to get the journal, flip to page 87 to see that article. And what I did instead was I just took that article that was online, got the link, rewrote a summary of it, added the link in the blog, wrote a 4-paragraph summary of it in the blog, put a button at the bottom that said read the full study, and then ran ads to all the people that matched the job titles on Facebook and LinkedIn, and drove 50,000 clinicians to read that clinical trial about how our product is better than somebody else. Way better use case than hoping that a physician stumbles upon it in page 87. And so PR could be a good one. The last one I'll talk through is problem awareness. I think companies are, in my experience, quite bad at this, quite poor at trying to illuminate problems because they're too much in sales mode. They're too much in conversion mode that they would never think about trying to educate someone about a problem because it wouldn't align to their lead gen goals. And so they just move into conversion. So in problem awareness, we've had a couple of these that have worked really well. And so some examples are like some big firm that all of your customers trust publishes some report, and the report is saying that 65% of CISOs are struggling with this, and it had nothing to you weren't funding the product, you're not paying that analyst firm or whoever's publishing the data, but they just pointed that out, and that's something that your product solves. And then you could go and take that research report and write a blog about it. This is kind of like the clinical trial example that I just gave, except you're not pushing the product or the benefits of the product. You're just illuminating a problem that people didn't know that they had through a reputable study. And so 68% of CISOs are struggling with this. Our product solves this. I'm going to write that blog post. I'm going to drive CISOs to that so that more CISOs understand that this is a problem, a lot of other CISOs are feeling that problem, and they're on our website and we solve that problem. And so there's a ton of different iterations that you can do there to help people understand. You can use statistics. You could use statistics from third parties. You can use first-party survey data. You can use animations to tell stories. The creative flexibility is high here. So, but when we're in this thing, I like being in news reporter mode. I like being in objective mode. Here I'm presenting the facts. You think about it however you want, which avoids you being salesy trying to convert someone on a blog that's not designed to do that. So you could put 10 or 15% on that to round out to 100, and that is a starting point for a full funnel content mix. I acknowledge that there are a lot of companies that aren't able to produce that level of content, whether they don't have the talent, they don't have the subject matter expertise, they don't understand their customers well enough, any of those reasons. If you just focused on the product marketing and you did that well, you would drive a major impact for your business. The rest of the stuff is nice. The rest of the stuff is a level 2.0 or 3.0 for companies that already have a lot working. But if you just understood your customers and told a better story about your product that right now you rely on your sales team to tell in a demo, you'd get better results in your marketing.
Mic drop. No questions. That was great.
Whoa. Cool.
I actually have a bunch that were submitted in advance and a couple other questions that are a little off topic. Should we have a little open AMA?
I'm ready to go. Bit? Yeah, the last one will be pretty short, so let's go.
We can use the last agenda item to close out in a little bit. Terry, I am going to bring you on so that you can ask your question. And then Grant, you submitted several excellent questions in advance. Maybe try to pick your top 2 or 3, and I'll bring you on after Terry. You're on live, Terry.
Thank you, and thanks. It's great to jump on here. I haven't been here for a while, but I always love the amazing amount of information you guys share. And we are currently on our way to bludgeoning a 10 million ARR with Outbound. we're about a tenth of the way there, so we're still very early days. But I'm really starting to think about our first marketing hire so that we can start to do both together now that we've got some revenue coming in. What would be the ideal marketing hire, the first one that we bring into the business? What would you suggest there?
So it's a complicated question, but I'll try and give you a simple answer, right? Because it truly is dependent on the skill levels of the founders. So let's just assume for the sake that like the founders don't know a lot about marketing, okay, which is relatively common, right? They typically come from sales, product, or finance background. But anyway, so in that instance, I think you have 2 sort of directions. Focusing on someone that's like a growth marketer can be like a good thing because typically they can handle a lot of things full stack. They can go out and find like a freelance creative. They can write blogs. They can run ads. They can do general marketing ops. They can do a lot of things. When you find that person, though, you need to make sure that they understand what the right strategy is, which I think a lot of growth marketers miss. They're so obsessed with the analytics and the data and basically performance marketing that all they end up doing is generating a bunch of shitty leads that your outbound team doesn't want. And so the growth marketer can be a good one, but you need to have a solid understanding about what that person needs to be able to be capable of doing in order to hire the right person, because I think there's a lot of pretenders out there right now. The other angle, and this one I think would be potentially more rare, but my ideal hire would be a product marketer that knows how to research and understand customers, that has a desire to learn how to do demand gen. That's what I think what you want. For a lot of companies that are 1 million ARR, a marketer that can do that basically can help you build strategy faster. And so the first levers that they're going to help do is like customer research, messaging, segmentation, targeting. And through those levers will just improve outbound performance, is my belief, if you have the right person. And then at that point, you either have more confidence to give them a partner that handles paid, or they're starting to run paid on their own because they want to learn it. That's what I'm thinking about. I interact with a lot of product marketers and surprised that, I don't see like the customer interaction that I would expect out of that function. I don't see it enough. But like I've been the one marketer in the 800K ARR company. That was the most, and I did a bunch of stuff, got put on the MQL hamster wheel. The most valuable thing that I did for that company was spend 4 months going out and talking to customers, understanding segmentation, putting together a plan, remessaging the product. Once you segment and say, this is the segment that we're going after. And once we choose one of the 5 segments, we can make our messaging way better. And then when we target them in outbound and the messaging is way better, we actually get meetings and we actually close deals. So otherwise, what companies do is they go to all 5 segments with broad messaging, and the broad messaging doesn't work with the one segment that is in there. A lot of salespeople will be able to give you anecdotal feedback, but somebody that really understands how to dig in with customers and do research will be able to get that to you faster and more accurately. So those are 2 different ways to look at it. Like the growth marketer is going to be more short-term, potentially lead gen, things like that. The product marketer is going to be more strategy, long-term.
Thanks. Look, I think I'd be weighing much more towards the product market. It's the longer term viewpoint that we have. So someone that can help us, as you've rightly pointed out, the strategy component for us is probably the key. And so understanding the market and the product well enough to be able to help build the longer term strategies where we're at. So thank you. I appreciate that.
100%. And the interview criteria for that is just tell me about a time that you needed to go out and do customer research, and what did you do? And I'm going to leave it open-ended to that. And I'm going to be looking for them to say qualitative interviews, a number of them with both customers and prospects, quantitative interviews, quantitative assessment inside of the CRM based on company firmographics and different things. I want them to cover segmentation, and I want them to cover how the segmentation impacted messaging, and then what they did with all of that information. That would be how I would choose that person.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, Terry.
Great to have you here, Terry.
All right, Grant. I'm going to allow a few questions, but let's start with your top 2. You're on live.
Sounds good. Thanks. So one question I have is we're currently targeting 4 regions globally. A couple of them each, we're planning to increase the quarterly budget for demand gen for those regions individually, about 50K per quarter to about 150K per quarter. How much of a higher cost per opportunity do you think we should expect?
That's a loaded question. Tell me about what you're doing right now. So like, are you running lead gen? Are you doing more like the model that we talk about here? Like, give me a sense about what's going on, then I can tell you. Or at least I'll make an estimate,
Sure. Yeah, I would say we're moving more to this model now, and in some regions we kind of already have it. In particular, one of them that I'm referring to, I'd say it's similar to this. We're kind of known as the market leader. In the other region, not many people know about us, but we're trying to kind of use this model more so. So I'd say it's a mix between which region we're talking about.
Do you have a baseline sense of what your cost per op is right now?
Yes.
He's looking it up, everybody.
That's true.
Ballpark is fine.
Oh yeah. Just an estimate.
Call it like between $400 and $600.
Okay, that's pretty strong ACV.
Yeah.
How much does the product cost every year in ARR?
We're usage based,
Okay.
so it's kind of variable.
Got it. So in this type of situation, we've been with companies that were spending 75K and we figured out how to get that to work. And now we currently spend 300K at the same cost per qualified opportunity. So it's possible. It's possible to scale in that way. Obviously, you have little fluctuations, but generally the graph is flat. So you typically at some point you're going to have to make a prioritization between efficiency and scale or volume. And so at some point we'll come up against that, right? Like if we were focused less on scale and volume, then we probably could continue to lower the cost per op through better targeting, better creative, eliminating, bad placements and channels. There's a lot of things that you could do, but that's not necessarily the focus right now. They need to hit their Q4 goal and it's huge. So it's possible to scale without any increase in cost per opportunity. I would say that that's not usually the likely case. It all depends on what you're doing with the extra money, how many people are in the audience relative to how much you're spending on ads to begin with, what the channel mix is. It's almost impossible for me to give you an estimate here, except for saying the range here is it could stay the same it could get 3x higher if the rest of the money is wasted. So it's somewhere in that range. My guess is that you're going to end up somewhere between 100 and 150% if you run the same formula and there's enough creative and a big enough audience to support the additional spend. I think that's one thing that people miss in paid social, like companies that just dump advertising money as a way to solve the problem, is there's only 50,000 people that you can sell to in LinkedIn, and we're paying, just for sake of round numbers, say $50 CPM, then you're only going to have a limited amount of money that you can spend there without completely saturating the audience. And then what they do is they just take $100,000 and push it in there and just run impression to the same people, hit a ton of saturation. So if you hit that level of saturation, that's when the results really go down. So what I would do is I would map out what is the audience size. It's better, especially on LinkedIn, to look at reach, not the audience size that they give you, because those two numbers are very different. What we're finding is somewhere between 10 and 20% of the audience is what you're actually reaching on LinkedIn. So there's a big gap there. So if there's 1 million people in the audience, typically your reach is 10 or 100,000, so 10%. So you could look at what is the reach of my existing campaigns, and then you can start to see what is the frequency, how much more money is coming in. If I put this much more additional money in 3x, how much would the frequency be? Then you could back calculate how much additional creative you need in order to support the channel, which is going to be pretty in line with how much you're scaling the budget. So you're going to need about 3x creative to support that, as long as you're currently hitting frequency.
Got it. Thanks.
So I wish I could give you a more clear-cut answer, but this is totally dependent on execution. So I have confidence that you're going to scale up that budget and keep the cost per SQO at $400. But report back. Let us know how it goes and what you learn.
Yeah, will do. Thanks.
And happy to have you squeeze in a second question if you want, Grant.
Bring it on, Grant.
More? Yeah.
We're rolling.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a question a bit around how to align marketing demand gen with sales and overall targets. What do you think is a good goal for a sales team's target for the number of opportunities that one sales rep can effectively work at any given time and not be under or over capacity? So, if the number of reps isn't aligned to, let's say, your closed won goal or your ARR goal, it might be difficult to actually achieve that. If you want to make a really exaggerated example, if there's 10 reps with $1 million per year target, but their average deal size is $500 ARR, that's going to be nearly impossible.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, how many active deals do you think a sales rep can manage at once?
Yep.
My guess is somewhere between 25 and 50, but there's a ton of people more qualified to answer that question. Our sales process is unique, with pretty velocity sale for a high ARR deal for us. And a lot of the people that come into us, we're not doing any convincing. And so the sales process is way different than what a SaaS sales rep's experience in terms of sales cycle length, likelihood to win, amount of like education or convincing post like inside of the sales process versus doing it way before it through marketing. And so for me, if I like didn't have any other jobs, I feel like right now I could do somewhere between 25 and 50 at once. So, but a lot of other, if reps are in a velocity model, maybe I feel, now that I think about it, I feel like it's probably going to fall into that range for most people.
Helpful. Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks, Grant. All right. One of our favorites, Ashley, you're on Demand Gen Live.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi. So I have a question. I've been cooking up an idea. I guess a few weeks ago, we talked about like creating word of mouth marketing, and we just launched a freemium tier of a product this week. And I've been thinking a lot about getting like those super users and the influencers on the product and it becoming more product led. So I have this idea about building like these super user cohorts and using the premise of a challenge to work with them and get influential users trained on the product really well and driving word of mouth based on their success. So the question with that is, do you have any examples or experience with training small groups and kind of creating small communities of users on SaaS products having worked well?
Are they already your current customer?
We could combine, we could bring new people on. It's a floating idea at the moment.
Yeah. So one thing that I would think about, like if some random company was approaching me and was like, hey, would love to train you on our product, I would be like, no. Like oftentimes I just wouldn't have a need to do that right now. I'm busy. So I would just like I would think about the what's in it for me if you're approaching people that don't currently use the product, because it's an investment of time and a lot of people value that. So there's ways that you can make it work, but just be aware on that side. Mm-hmm. The goal would be to make it a no-brainer. So figure out how, like if you value doing this so much, like what is the offer to make it a no-brainer for somebody that you want in there to be excited to be there. When it comes to the training, we've done a lot of different things, especially in my medical device days where it was in person, where you would have 5 to 10 clinicians and you would go and you would train one floor of like rapid training of the product and then move to the next like area of the hospital and go through in that. And so there's ways that's not exactly creating like power users or moving word of mouth. That was way more like customer success implementation. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I'm happy to answer a follow-up.
This I'm seeing almost as an event that's like a series of sessions with an end goal that helps them. Like it's creator economy people launching a newsletter and showing them from like start to launch how to produce something of quality, right?
Yeah. So what I would do, here's the no-brainer. It may not work for your company, but here's what I would do. I would select who my people are. I would make sure that the short and long-term impact of having them involved in this justifies doing this. And then I would hope that there's like 10 to 20 people. And I would send them something very nice that invites them to travel somewhere very nice, all expenses paid. The company is maybe bringing in a speaker or two, and then you're providing stuff, which is basically a masterclass of how to execute email, like stuff that they can't get, you know what I mean? Like super good content, and then spend a couple of days doing like random stuff with them. Like that's what I would consider doing, like making it ultra premium and ultra focused. Yeah, that's what I would think. Like a newsletter product may not justify it. 100K ACV SaaS tool definitely would.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget the fancy dinner and all the booze. All right. This has been a really exciting episode, and I'm pleased to bring on LinkedIn's cutest accountant, Michael. Got some great questions.
That was the best branding decision I ever made, and that makes it sound like it was a decision. It wasn't, but I love it. So I guess I have some questions about collab marketing and influencers and stuff to carry on with that, right? There's a lot of talk about finding influencers and stuff, but there's very little talk of structuring the deal once you found them, right? So what exactly you pay them for, what deliverable, what, I know we don't like to say attribution here, but like what we're tracking and paying them for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you structure it? What do you think should be tracked? What do you think should be paid for? Your thoughts? Comments?
So identifying them is easy, right? Like if you're embedded in the community, it's very easy to know who they are. I'm saying that mainly for the people listening, not for you. In terms of the types of offers and overall executions that I'm doing in this, like if I'm doing influencer, I'm making it a create demand play.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a capture demand play, it's more like an affiliate, right? And so, or a partner network. So like, let's exclude that for right now. When you're in create demand, obviously attribution is going to be cloudy. Obviously, you're not doing stuff that's conversion based. And so my feeling is that if you set it up that way, you drive way more authentic executions with your people, and you can structure deals in a way that's, I think, just much more reasonable on both sides versus like, hey, I'll give you 10% of all our deals are closed if they use your link. Like, forget that. And so the way that I would do it is I would identify my targets, and then I would think about 3 or 4 core things that I'm trying to get done with them. I'm trying to have them participate in some type of content collaboration. A lot of people would just do that for free. So I'm gonna set up some of that. That could be content collaboration on a webinar. It could be on a podcast. It could be being a guest at a live event. It could be speaking at our masterclass in Barbados that we're doing for Ashley's thing, right? So any content collaboration would be one of them. I would have an element of surprise and delight that could be as high as super nice VIP trip. That could be as different as sending them a bottle of wine when they moved into their new house because you have a relationship with them. So anything in between those two things in terms of surprise and delight. The next thing that I would think about doing, if they use your product already, is structuring some type of payment for user-generated content where they just provide a overview of how they use the tool. So I haven't seen a lot of companies do that right now. I think that would be highly effective. Find your power user that also has that. And you're not doing it for, most people use quote unquote influencers for distribution. In this case, they're probably not going to post that on their own. You're not using them for distribution, but you're using them for content creation and credibility that then you can distribute. So that would be a third one. I thought I had a fourth one. Slipped my mind.
Take advantage
Feel
of
free to
live.
DM me.
Oh, and the last one that I think that's highly underrated is like content collaboration can get you there, but just generally like getting those people to be aware of you and building a relationship with them in a way that's authentic. I just don't think people value that enough, right? Like there's been random companies that have me on their podcast that I would never know about right now. I can think about one of them and like, I don't need it right now, but it's like in the back of my mind of, like when the time comes that I need that, I'm going to go to that company because they had me on their fucking podcast like 6 months ago. And so there's little things like that people I don't think really understand. I make recommendations to people on what CRM to use, what marketing automation, what ABM platform, what sales engagement platform, what ad targeting tool, what calendar booking tool, a million products, tons of, what software to use to record your podcast. I could go on for a very long time about all the different stuff that people ask me. And there's a lot of things that people ask me that I don't have a preferred tool, that I don't use one. but I usually give people an answer, and that answer is usually driven through what other people told me that they use that I trust. And so I become someone that's like driving word of mouth because a lot of people ask me, but I am only answering because it's the only brand that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of different plays in there that I think that you could use, and that's purely on the create demand, no attribution, brand plays. Did you have anything you were considering that I didn't mention there?
I don't think so.
Okay, no, I'm just curious. I'm looking for ideas.
I was going to make a comment how me bringing you on live, Michael, to ask your question has now enabled me for you to give me free advice on how to like improve AR collection for my small business. So like you can capitalize on these organic interactions. You owe me now.
Do you want free advice on improving AR collection?
Yeah, but not right now.
All right. I got advice.
I know.
The shtick.
Well, we'll talk later. But great questions, Michael. Love having you on the show.
Did you have one more?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Cool.
I will later in like 15 minutes when I digest this and I realize, damn it.
Might have to save it for next week. I'm not sure we're going to be going for 15 more, but we'll see. Who else has got questions? Otherwise, we'll cover the third topic. Good to see you, Michael.
We went through all the questions. So yeah, let's riff on that last topic, see if it inspires any more. But I think we could close out with final thoughts on your last agenda item.
Yeah, I think this one's could be pretty short and sweet here. We've covered this a couple times on the podcast before. It keeps coming up. It's coming up in conversations with a lot of different companies. I think that smart companies are going to be like, yeah, this is obvious. But for the smart companies that are listening, that are thinking, yeah, this is obvious, recognize that you're in a bucket of 5 or 10%, maybe slightly higher. But a lot of companies don't think this way. And so the topic is why companies need to create content in-house. I interact with a ton of companies, early stage, later stage, that are outsourcing SEO, that are like trying to outsource to an agency pretty much anything related to content. And there's major challenges and major problems with this model long term. But before I want to take a step back, it's like earlier in the episode I talked about, I think that the winning formula right now is marketing and customer success. Like content is how, like a good story and a good strategy are the foundation. And then content is the deployment that drives marketing to work today. That's it. And so if it is it's arguably, when done correctly, the number one most important thing outside of strategy that you could execute in marketing in order to drive an impact for your business and grow your company and build a brand and be successful long term. That's today. Where do you think this is going? We're not going backwards. We're not going back to a place where content was less important. And so the idea that if you run a business right now and you think that you don't need to create content in-house, where do you think that you're going to be relative to your competitive set in 3 years? And conversely, on the other side, for companies that are investing in content and different things like that, and you recognize that your competitors aren't, think about if you went even harder, how much further ahead that you would be in these companies that would create a massive advantage over a 12 or 24 month period of time. It's just really, really crazy. We're doing it right now at Refine Labs. I think some performance marketing agency is going to pop out of nowhere after they've been doing nothing but running Google search ads and living off referrals. They're going to pop out of nowhere and have a content strategy and come back from this. No, there's way too much momentum. They will not be able to stop it, right? And a lot of companies could do it if they wanted to. And so why you need to build it in-house is, one, any content that's going to be effective today and break through the noise requires deep subject matter expertise. And that subject matter expertise must be farmed inside of your company so that you can do it on an ongoing basis and you can execute it in like a frequent, rapid way. Imagine if we outsourced the actual content creation, right? Like we outsource some parts of the post-production, someone that can edit our podcast, someone that can clip some videos or something like that. But imagine if we outsourced me, like you couldn't do it. It wouldn't work that way, doing 3 a week, being able to drive the narrative, being able to feed that back into product. There are a lot of things that just wouldn't work if you were outsourcing that. And so subject matter expertise deep built in-house, the industries that I'm seeing companies do this the best at the moment, I'm not looking at a ton of them, but at the moment, the ones I see the best are MarTech vendors and cybersecurity companies that have CISOs writing articles, that have their CMO that is really active in creating content. Those are two things where I don't see it happening. I don't see it in companies that sell to finance. I don't see it in the companies that are selling to HR. I see it in some companies that are selling to HR. Let me take that back. But those are building the deep subject matter expertise is required to be successful in a content engine right now. You can hack it together, right? You're a 3 million ARR company with one marketer, and that marketer has no idea about the expertise of your customers. Like, I've kind of been in that position before. You can hack it together for a little while. You can go out and interview people, and you can get some traction on that. But as soon as possible, you need to bring that in-house so that you can control the volume, the production, and the thoughts. When you're interviewing people, and this is a main play that people do in podcasts and something that I think they're leaving a lot of upside on the table, when your main play on a podcast is just to interview guests, you have no control over the narrative. You're just drafting off of the audience and the credibility that person has, and that'll get you somewhere. But it's way more effective if you have a point of view and you're driving your own narrative. 2 is the long-term upside. I kind of alluded to this already, but the long-term upside of getting this to work, this is what we're talking about essentially, is building a media company. Building a media company inside of your company that creates information that measures based on intention and engagement with relevant people and creates things that people like. A lot of times without a hidden agenda to sales, which is another thing that companies struggle with. But the long-term upside of this, if you get it right, is very, very difficult to replace. The cost of doing it is actually also quite low. The cost of all the stuff that we're doing here and we've been doing for a very long time is actually quite low, aside from the labor, the time into it. It actually is just effort and talent and commitment. And so if you're able to get it right and you're able to have a podcast that in your TAM, you have 5,000 accounts in your TAM, and you got 3,000 accounts listening to your podcast because you have the best podcast in the industry, you think that's going to move the needle? Yeah. So the upside there is super high. When you're creating content, I guess you can kind of get this if you were, actually, I don't think that you would get this if you outsourced it. When you're creating content for yourself, the amount of relationships that we're able to build with other people that we collaborate with and the people that come to our events is unparalleled. It's scaled networking. And so all the guests that come on the podcast, we probably had more than 100 already. If you include the live events, it's probably more than that. 100 SaaS CMOs, people that are influential, people like that now we're on our podcast, understand that we really know what we're talking about over here, and then potentially would recommend. And I actually am at a sales call with somebody today that was recommended to somebody that was on our podcast like nine months ago, and then recommended us to this company, has never worked with us. So the relationships that get built there, if you select your guests in the right way and you can actually deliver on what you're saying, is a very important point. Sweetfish Media calls it content-based networking. At least that was their previous positioning. I think that's one component of they position it as like the main reason to do a podcast. I think about it as a tertiary reason. It's beneficial, but it's not the main reason that I do it. And the last piece is it really, really helps you drive your narrative or evangelize your category into the market in a way that if you outsource it, it's difficult to do. It's difficult to transfer the IP of your strategy to somebody else outside of your company and then have them interpret that strategy and put together content on an ongoing basis that delivers that message. And so I just feel like companies should really consider this. I think it is the two things that I'm recommending companies center around right now in terms of overall like tangible skills is deep customer insights and relationships and organic content production. If you did nothing else right, if you just took care of those two things, you could outsource You could outsource mops, you could outsource ads, you could do several different things that you could outsource. And if you were able to just get those couple things, I think that you would have a pretty dramatic impact in-house. And the things that I mentioned there, deep customer insights and content creation that involves subject matter expertise, are things that are difficult to replicate through a third-party partner, which is why I recommend companies do them on their own. And so I imagine that if at the moment you're a company and you don't believe in creating content in-house, I'm not sure that my statement over the past 2 or 3 minutes has convinced you otherwise, but you should really think about it, because you're going to look back at it in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and you're going to really wish that you did, because we're in a content-driven world. Marketing is becoming way more important, not less important. The companies that are winning are going to continue to invest in this direction. And with that, I think we're getting ready to close out here. So everyone, this was a great episode. I felt like I was really on my game, actually. So that felt good. And always a pleasure to see you all. Thanks for sticking around until almost 9 p.m. Eastern. And also hope to see some of you at the Dave Gerhardt event. And if not, maybe we'll see you next Tuesday at Demand Gen Live. So appreciate all of you. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for all the great questions tonight.